In a secluded lair, hidden deep within the dense forests bordering a small, unsuspecting village, a group of vampires lived in secret. They had existed there for centuries, feeding on the occasional traveler or lost soul who wandered too far from the village. But recently their hunger had grown insatiable, and they began to venture closer to the village, leaving a trail of bodies in their wake. As the nights passed, the villagers started finding the bodies of murder victims, drained of blood, and marked by the telltale signs of a vampire attack. Fear and paranoia gripped the village, and whispers of the undead lurking in the shadows spread like wildfire. The local police were baffled and overwhelmed, unable to explain the gruesome deaths. The vampires, realizing their crimes had been uncovered, grew desperate. They had always managed to stay hidden, but now the increasing frequency of their attacks had drawn unwanted attention. The leader of the vampires, a cunning and ruthless being named Victor, knew they had to act swiftly to avoid discovery and annihilation. Meanwhile, the village police department, recognizing the severity of the situation, decided to call in a professional. They contacted Christopher Robert, a seasoned homicide detective known for his sharp mind and unyielding determination. Christopher had solved countless cases in his career, but he had never faced anything like this. Christopher arrived in the village under the cover of darkness, his mind racing with the details he had been given. He had heard the villagers' stories and seen the gruesome photos of the victims. Though he was a man of logic and reason, something about this case felt different, almost supernatural. His first stop was the village police station, where he met with Officer Martinez, the local law enforcement officer in charge of the investigation. "Detective Robert," Martinez greeted him with a firm handshake. "We've never seen anything like this. The bodies, it's like something out of a horror movie." Christopher nodded, his expression serious. "I need to see the crime scenes and the bodies. Whatever is happening here, we need to stop it before more lives are lost." Martinez led Christopher to the first crime scene, a remote area just outside the village where a young woman had been found 2 nights ago. The ground was still stained with blood, and the air was thick with an eerie silence. As Christopher examined the scene, his keen eyes caught every detail: the positioning of the body, the bite marks on the neck, and the lack of any struggle. He knew they were dealing with something beyond the ordinary. Back at the vampire's lair, Victor and his followers were devising a plan. They knew the arrival of the detective meant trouble, and they couldn't afford to be careless. Victor addressed his group, his voice cold and commanding. "We must eliminate this detective before he uncovers our existence. He is smart, but he is still human. We will use our strengths to our advantage." Among the vampires was Isabella, a fiercely loyal and skilled member of the group. She had been with Victor for decades and was known for her cunning and agility. Victor assigned her the task of tracking Christopher and finding a way to take him down. As Christopher delved deeper into the investigation, he began to notice a pattern in the killings. The victims were all found near the forest, and each attack occurred on a moonless night. He spent hours going through old records and interviewing the villagers, piecing together the puzzle. One night, while Christopher was at the local tavern, a villager approached him, his face pale with fear. "Detective, I saw something terrible in the forest last night. It wasn't human." Christopher's heart raced. "What did you see?" The villager hesitated, his voice trembling. "It was a creature tall and dark with glowing red eyes. It moved faster than anything I've ever seen. I swear it was a vampire." Christopher knew he couldn't dismiss the villager's account, no matter how unbelievable it sounded. He thanked the man and made his way back to the police station, where he laid out his findings to Officer Martinez. "We're dealing with something beyond our understanding," Christopher said. "I believe the killers are vampires, and we need to approach this case with extreme caution." Martinez looked skeptical, but trusted Christopher's judgment. "What do we do now?" "We need to track them down and find their lair," Christopher replied. "And we need to do it quickly before they strike again." As the investigation intensified, Christopher felt the weight of the villagers' lives on his shoulders. He knew the vampires were watching his every move, waiting for the right moment to strike. But he was determined to outsmart them and bring an end to the terror that had gripped the village. Little did he know, The vampires were already planning their next move, and the hunt for the detective. The nights in the village grew colder and longer as Christopher's investigation pressed on. The villagers huddled in their homes, doors bolted and windows covered, as the fear of the unknown gripped their hearts. Meanwhile, Christopher and Officer Martinez plotted their next move, aware that each passing night brought more danger. Christopher decided to patrol the village's perimeter one night, hoping to catch a glimpse of the vampires or gather more clues. Armed with a flashlight and his service pistol, he ventured into the forest, his senses heightened and his every step calculated. The moonless sky cast an eerie darkness over the landscape, amplifying every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs. Hours passed, and just as Christopher was about to turn back, he heard a faint whisper, like the sound of wind passing through a narrow gap. He followed the noise, moving stealthily through the trees until he reached a clearing. There, in the pale light of his flashlight, he saw a figure. Tall, dark, and undeniably inhuman. It stood still, its red eyes glowing menacingly. "Who's there?" Christopher called out, his voice steady despite the fear creeping into his mind. The figure didn't respond but moved with incredible speed, disappearing into the darkness. Christopher knew he had to follow, and he sprinted after it, his heart pounding in his chest. The chase led him deeper into the forest, far beyond the village's borders. Suddenly he found himself at the entrance of an old, abandoned mansion, partially hidden by overgrown foliage. The air was thick with the stench of decay. Christopher realized this could be the vampire's lair. He cautiously approached the entrance, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Inside, the mansion was a labyrinth of dusty corridors and crumbling walls. Christopher moved silently, listening for any signs of life. As he turned a corner, he stumbled upon a room filled with old coffins, their lids slightly ajar. He felt a chill run down his spine. Before he could investigate further, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to see Isabella, her eyes locked onto his with an intense, predatory gaze. "You're brave, detective," she said, her voice cold and mocking, "but bravery won't save you." Christopher aimed his pistol at her, his finger on the trigger. "I'm here to stop you and your kind. Surrender now and no one else has to die." Isabella laughed, a sound that echoed through the empty mansion. "You think you can stop us? You have no idea what you're dealing with." Without warning, Isabella lunged at him, moving with supernatural speed. Christopher fired his pistol, but she dodged the bullets effortlessly. She knocked the gun from his hand and pinned him against the wall, her fangs bared. Just as she was about to sink her teeth into his neck, Christopher managed to grab a wooden stake from his coat pocket and thrust it into her chest. Isabella screamed in pain and rage, her body convulsing before collapsing to the floor. Breathing heavily, Christopher retrieved his pistol and continued his search. He knew there were more vampires, and he had to find a way to end this nightmare. He moved through the mansion with renewed determination, finally reaching a grand hall where Victor and the remaining vampires awaited. Victor stood at the center, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and amusement. "Welcome, detective. I've been expecting you." Christopher leveled his pistol at Victor. "It's over, Victor. Your reign of terror ends tonight." Victor smirked, his fangs glinting in the dim light. "You may have killed Isabella, but you won't survive the night. We are stronger, faster, and more powerful than you can imagine." The vampires closed in on Christopher, but he was prepared. He pulled out a vial of holy water and splashed it towards them, causing them to recoil in pain. Using the distraction, he made his way to the mansion's windows, where the first light of dawn was beginning to break. Christopher shattered the windows, allowing the sunlight to flood the room. The vampires screamed and writhed in agony as the sunlight seared their flesh. Victor, realizing his doom, made a desperate lunge at Christopher, but the detective was quicker. He drove another stake into Victor's heart, ending the vampire's life in a final, violent convulsion. As the sun rose higher, the remaining vampires succumbed to the light, their bodies turning to ash. Christopher watched as the terror that had plagued the village disintegrated before his eyes. He had done it. He had ended the nightmare. Exhausted but victorious, Christopher returned to the village. He was greeted as a hero, but he knew the scars of this ordeal would remain with him forever. The village could finally breathe a sigh of relief, knowing the darkness had been vanquished. Christopher spent the next few days recuperating and working with Officer Martinez to ensure the village's safety. The villagers were grateful for their newfound peace, but remained wary, knowing the events of the past weeks had left a lasting impact. Despite the apparent victory, Christopher knew his work was far from over. The remnants of Victor's vampire clan could still pose a threat. Determined to eradicate the danger once and for all, he began investigating the origins of the vampires and searching for any remaining members. One evening, as Christopher was reviewing his notes in his temporary office at the police station, a villager named Eliza approached him. She was a young woman with a keen sense of observation and a strong desire to help her community. "Detective Robert," Eliza began, her voice steady, "I think I can help you. I know the forest and the surrounding areas better than anyone. I've seen things that might be useful." Christopher looked up, intrigued. "Go on." Eliza took a deep breath. "There's a cave system a few miles from here. It's hidden, and most people don't know about it. I believe it might be another lair for the vampires." Christopher nodded, appreciating her bravery. "Thank you, Eliza. Can you show me the way?" The next morning, Christopher and Eliza set out at dawn. Armed with supplies and weapons, they navigated through the dense forest. Eliza led the way, her familiarity with the terrain evident in her confident strides. After several hours of trekking, they arrived at the entrance of the cave system. The air was damp and cool, and the cave's mouth yawned open like a dark, foreboding portal. Christopher switched on his flashlight and turned to Eliza. "You've done enough, Eliza. This is where it gets dangerous. I'll take it from here." Eliza shook her head. "No, Detective. I want to see this through. The village needs to be safe." Christopher admired her determination, but insisted she stay behind as a lookout. Reluctantly, Eliza agreed and watched as Christopher ventured into the cave. Inside, the cave was a labyrinth of narrow passages and cavernous rooms. The walls were covered in ancient markings, and the air was thick with the scent of earth and decay. Christopher moved cautiously, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. As he delved deeper, he heard faint sounds, whispers, footsteps, and the occasional rustle. He knew he was getting closer. His grip tightened on his pistol, ready for whatever awaited him. Suddenly, he entered a large chamber, dimly lit by the glow of phosphorescent fungi. At the center stood several vampires, their eyes gleaming in the low light. Among them was a figure Christopher recognized from his research. A vampire named Marcus, second in command to Victor. Marcus turned to face Christopher, his expression one of surprise and amusement. "Ah, the detective. I wondered when you'd show up." Christopher remained calm, his pistol aimed at Marcus. "This ends now, Marcus. Your reign of terror is over." Marcus chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "You're brave, Detective, but you're outnumbered. Do you really think you can stop us?" Without hesitation, Christopher fired his pistol, hitting one of the vampires in the chest. The creature fell, writhing in pain. The other vampires hissed and lunged at him, but Christopher was prepared. He threw a vial of holy water at them, causing them to recoil. Using the momentary distraction, Christopher advanced, his movements swift and precise. He aimed for Marcus, knowing that taking down the leader would demoralize the others. Marcus, however, was agile and strong, dodging Christopher's attacks with ease. The chamber echoed with the sounds of their struggle. Christopher fought with everything he had, his determination unwavering. Finally, he managed to corner Marcus and delivered a decisive blow, driving a stake into his chest. Marcus let out a guttural scream before collapsing. The remaining vampires, seeing their leader defeated, fled into the deeper recesses of the cave. Christopher didn't pursue them, knowing they were no longer a threat without their leader. Exhausted but triumphant, Christopher made his way back to the cave entrance, where Eliza was waiting anxiously. "Did you get them?" she asked, her eyes wide with concern. Christopher nodded, a weary smile on his face. "Marcus is gone. The others have fled. The village is safe." Eliza hugged him, relief washing over her. "Thank you, Detective. You've saved us all." As they made their way back to the village, Christopher reflected on the events of the past weeks. He knew the scars of this ordeal would remain, but he also knew the village could finally heal and move forward. Back in the village, Christopher and Eliza were greeted with cheers and gratitude. The villagers were relieved to hear that the threat had been neutralized. Officer Martinez congratulated Christopher, acknowledging the detective's crucial role in their victory. Christopher spent the next few days assisting the villagers in fortifying their defenses and ensuring everyone felt secure. He also worked on documenting the entire investigation, compiling his notes, evidence, and findings for future reference. The village had been through a harrowing experience, but Christopher was determined to make sure they were well prepared should any similar threat arise in the future. One evening, as Christopher was reviewing his notes in the village's makeshift command center, Officer Martinez approached him. "Detective, there's something you should see," she said, handing him a sealed letter. Christopher opened the letter and read its contents. It was from a neighboring village, requesting his help with a similar problem. Rumors of strange occurrences and unexplained disappearances had reached them, and they were in desperate need of assistance. Christopher sighed, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders once more. "Looks like my work isn't done yet," he muttered. Officer Martinez placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to do this alone, Christopher. We can help." Christopher nodded, grateful for the support. "Thank you, officer. Let's gather a team and see what we can do." The next morning, Christopher, Eliza, and a group of volunteers from the village set out for the neighboring village. The journey was long and arduous, but their resolve was strong. They knew the importance of standing together against the darkness that threatened their communities. Upon arriving, they were greeted by the village's leaders, who briefed them on the situation. The pattern of events was eerily similar to what Christopher had encountered before. Disappearances, strange sightings, and a pervasive sense of dread among the villagers. Christopher wasted no time in organizing the investigation. He divided the volunteers into teams, each assigned specific tasks, patrolling the village, gathering information, and searching for clues. Eliza, with her keen observational skills, played a crucial role in coordinating the efforts. As they delved deeper into the mystery, Christopher began to notice subtle differences in this new case. The vampires here seemed more cautious, leaving fewer traces of their presence. It was clear they had learned from the downfall of Victor and his clan. One evening, while patrolling the outskirts of the village, Christopher and Eliza came across an abandoned church. The building was in disrepair, its windows shattered and its walls covered in ivy. It exuded an air of foreboding, and Christopher felt a familiar chill run down his spine. "This place feels off," Eliza whispered, her voice barely audible. Christopher nodded. "Let's check it out." Inside, the church was eerily quiet. Dust motes danced in the beams of their flashlights, and the air was thick with the scent of neglect. As they moved through the nave, Christopher noticed a trapdoor partially hidden beneath a pile of debris. He motioned for Eliza to stand back as he carefully cleared the debris and opened the trapdoor. A narrow staircase led down into the darkness. "Stay close," he instructed, descending the stairs with Eliza following closely behind. The basement was a maze of narrow passageways and small chambers. It was clear this place had been used for some time, though not for its original purpose. They moved cautiously, aware of the potential danger lurking in the shadows. Eventually, they came upon a large chamber lit by flickering candles. At the center stood a figure Christopher immediately recognized, a vampire named Lucien, who had once been Victor's lieutenant. Lucien looked up, his eyes narrowing as he saw Christopher. "Detective Robert," Lucien said, his voice cold and calculating. "You've been a thorn in our side for far too long." Christopher aimed his flashlight at Lucien, the beam illuminating the vampire's pale face. "It's over, Lucien. Your kind will not terrorize these villages any longer." Lucien smirked, revealing his sharp fangs. "You're too late, Detective. We've already begun our plan. This village will be the first of many to fall." Before Christopher could respond, Lucien vanished into the shadows. The chamber suddenly filled with the sounds of movement as more vampires emerged from hidden alcoves. Christopher and Eliza were surrounded. Thinking quickly, Christopher reached into his coat and pulled out a flare, igniting it and throwing it to the ground. The bright light and heat forced the vampires to retreat momentarily, giving Christopher and Eliza a chance to escape. They ran through the labyrinthine passages, their path illuminated by the fading light of the flare. With the vampires defeated and the immediate threat neutralized, the village began the process of healing and rebuilding. The people were exhausted but grateful, and they looked to Christopher and his team with immense respect. Christopher and Eliza took a moment to reflect on their journey as they walked through the village. The once quiet streets were now filled with the sounds of activity and recovery. The villagers worked together, repairing homes, organizing supplies, and comforting one another. One afternoon, as Christopher was helping with the cleanup, Officer Martinez approached him. "Detective, we've received another message. It's from the neighboring villages. They've heard about what happened here, and they want your help." Christopher sighed, the weight of his responsibility pressing on him. "I can't ignore them. If there's any chance to prevent more suffering, we have to act." Eliza, standing beside him, nodded in agreement. "We should help them, Christopher. We've seen what can happen if we don't." Christopher and Eliza gathered the remaining volunteers, preparing for their next mission. The journey to the neighboring villages was long, but they traveled with determination, knowing that their skills and experience were needed elsewhere. Upon arrival, they were met with similar fears and concerns. The neighboring villages had been experiencing disturbances, strange noises, missing persons, and an overall sense of unease. Christopher quickly got to work, setting up a temporary command center and organizing the villagers into teams. As the investigation began, Christopher and his team discovered that the disturbances were not just random incidents, but part of a coordinated effort by the remnants of the vampire clan. Lucien had managed to escape the previous battle and was now rallying his forces for a renewed attack. The evidence pointed to a series of hidden locations scattered throughout the region. Abandoned buildings, old mines, and other secluded spots where the vampires might be hiding. Christopher and his team devised a plan to search these locations systematically. One night, while investigating an old, decrepit mine, Christopher and Eliza came across a group of vampires gathered around a makeshift altar. It was clear they were performing some sort of ritual, their dark energy palpable. "We need to stop them before they complete this ritual," Christopher said urgently. Eliza nodded, her face set with determination. "Let's do it." They entered the mine quietly, careful not to alert the vampires. As they approached the altar, they saw Lucien standing at the center, chanting in a language Christopher did not recognize. The ritual was meant to enhance the vampires' power and give them a stronger foothold in the region. Christopher and Eliza moved swiftly, taking out the vampires guarding the ritual with precise and coordinated attacks. Lucien, sensing the intrusion, turned to face them with a look of fury. "You again?" Lucien growled. "You will not ruin our plans this time." Without hesitation, Christopher engaged Lucien in combat. The two fought fiercely, their movements quick and powerful. Christopher used every tactic he had learned, but Lucien was formidable and relentless. During the struggle, Eliza worked to disrupt the ritual. She overturned the altar and scattered the items, preventing the vampires from completing their dark ceremony. As the ritual's energy dissipated, the vampires began to falter. Christopher seized the opportunity and with one final decisive blow, subdued Lucien. The remaining vampires, seeing their leader defeated and their ritual ruined, fled in disarray. Breathing heavily, Christopher and Eliza surveyed the aftermath. The mine, once a site of dark power, was now quiet and still. They had stopped the immediate threat, but Christopher knew that vigilance was key. Returning to the neighboring villages, Christopher and his team were met with relief and gratitude. The immediate danger had been averted, but the threat of vampires still loomed. Christopher and Eliza made it their mission to continue monitoring the situation and ensuring that the villages remained safe. As they prepared to leave, the villagers gathered to thank them. One elderly woman approached Christopher, her eyes filled with appreciation. "You've done more than we could ever repay. You've given us hope. Christopher smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment. It's been an honor to help. Remember, you're not alone. As long as there are those willing to stand together, there is hope. With the villages safe and the immediate threat quelled, Christopher and Eliza returned to their own village. They continued to help with the recovery efforts and maintained their vigilance, knowing that the peace they had fought so hard to achieve was fragile and needed constant protection. Christopher reflected on his experiences, realizing that his journey had taught him much about courage. As the weeks turned into months, the villages slowly returned to normalcy. Christopher and Eliza's work had not gone unnoticed. Their dedication and bravery had earned them the gratitude and respect of many communities. But even as they enjoyed a brief respite, they knew the threat of the supernatural could never be entirely eliminated. One crisp autumn morning, Christopher received an unexpected visitor, a historian named Dr. Evelyn Carter. She had heard about the recent vampire disturbances and believed her expertise could provide valuable insights. "Detective Robert," Dr. Carter said, extending a hand. "I've studied various folklore and historical accounts of supernatural occurrences. I think I might have information that could help prevent future threats." Christopher shook her hand, intrigued. "Please, come in. Tell me what you know." Dr. Carter took a seat at the table and began to explain. "I've come across references to a powerful artifact known as the Bloodstone. According to legend, it's a key element in vampire lore. It's said to amplify their powers and grant them dominion over their kind." Christopher listened intently. "And where might this artifact be found?" Dr. Carter looked concerned. "The Bloodstone is rumored to be hidden in an ancient crypt, buried deep beneath the ruins of an old castle. It's believed to be guarded by numerous traps and protective wards." Christopher nodded, realizing the importance of locating the Bloodstone before it fell into the wrong hands. "We need to find this artifact and secure it. If the vampires get their hands on it, they could become an even greater threat." Eliza, who had been listening from the sidelines, spoke up. "We should organize a team to investigate the ruins. We'll need to be thorough and cautious." Christopher agreed. "Absolutely. We'll prepare for a detailed expedition and ensure we're ready for any challenges." The following week, Christopher, Eliza, Dr. Carter, and a small team of skilled individuals set out for the ruins of the old castle. The journey was treacherous, with dense forests and rocky terrain adding to the challenge. Despite the obstacles, their resolve was unwavering. Upon reaching the castle, they found it in a state of ruin, with crumbling walls and overgrown vegetation. The entrance to the crypt was hidden beneath a layer of debris, requiring careful excavation. As they descended into the crypt, the air grew colder, and an eerie silence enveloped them. The walls were adorned with ancient symbols and inscriptions, hinting at the dangers that lay ahead. Christopher led the way, flashlight in hand, while Dr. Carter translated the inscriptions. "These symbols are protective wards," she explained. "We need to be cautious. They're designed to keep intruders out." The team navigated through a series of traps and obstacles, relying on their combined skills and knowledge. They encountered hidden passageways, treacherous pits, and puzzles that tested their ingenuity. The deeper they went, the more intense the atmosphere became. Finally, they reached the central chamber of the crypt. At its heart was a pedestal, upon which rested the Bloodstone, glowing ominously with a dark red hue. The artifact radiated a powerful energy that was both captivating and frightening. As they approached the Bloodstone, a series of protective wards activated, causing the chamber to tremble. Shadows emerged from the walls, taking the form of spectral guardians. The team had to fight off these apparitions while carefully retrieving the artifact. Christopher and Eliza coordinated their efforts, using their knowledge of the wards and their combat skills to fend off the guardians. Dr. Carter provided crucial insights into the artifact's significance, helping them understand its properties and weaknesses. After a tense and challenging battle, they managed to secure the Bloodstone. The spectral guardians dissipated, and the crypt's defenses deactivated. The team was exhausted but victorious. Back at the village, Christopher and his team were hailed as heroes once again. The Bloodstone was safely stored in a secure location, and Dr. Carter continued her research to understand its full implications. Christopher, reflecting on the recent events, realized the importance of vigilance and preparation. The supernatural world was complex and filled with dangers, but with the right knowledge and teamwork, they could face any challenge. Eliza, who had grown close to Christopher through their shared experiences, offered him a reassuring smile. "We did it, Christopher. We made a difference." Christopher smiled back, feeling a sense of accomplishment. "We did, and we'll continue to protect our communities no matter what comes our way." As the seasons changed and the village returned to a semblance of normal life, Christopher and his team remained vigilant, knowing that the balance between light and darkness was a delicate one.